What's up, guys? Welcome to Principles of Performance. My name's Cam, and today I'm just going to touch on a little topic that gets a lot of traction in the health and fitness world, specifically in and around performance for all demographics of athlete. And this is also a little follow-up video to a great video that my buddies at Melbourne Strength Culture did recently on cardio and how that can affect your gains. Classic Cam fashion, I like to deep dive onto stuff. This isn't going to be as deep a dive, but I'd really like to explore some of the concepts that Jamie talks about in that video around aerobic conditioning and how that can have an effect on your performance and your gains. And what I'm going to do is take a session that I like to prescribe for a lot of my athletes and non-athletes as well. And I'm going to run that session and show you guys a little bit of potentially a different way of looking at it. Before we do that, let's just quickly dive in on the mechanics of this session. So the mechanics of the session are aerobic conditioning. Specifically, we're trying to stimulate oxidative phosphorylation. So we're taking a really deep dive physiologically on cellular aerobic respiration. The effects of that are very far-reaching, and they go so far as to underpin almost every single athletic output that you can do. I won't go too much into it because the guys at Melbourne Strength Culture, and I'll put a link in the video, they do a great job of explaining some of the benefits to that. Instead, what I'm going to do today is just take a different approach to the same concept. So what I'm going to do is use my session with the assault bike. We're going to go 15 seconds on, 15 seconds off for 8 rounds. 15 seconds on, we're going to be specifically focusing on maintaining a steady pace that isn't too intense. So 15 seconds of work at 350 watts on the assault bike, or as close to, and then 15 seconds off, which will be an active recovery period where I'll be going 200 watts. So it's pretty low dose, but I'm going to be focusing on nose breathing throughout that rest period. The goal here is to train the other side of that coin. When we talk about cellular aerobic respiration, we're not just talking about oxygen, but we're talking about carbon dioxide as well. So this session, the purpose is to improve or just to expose my nervous system's ability to regulate CO2. So we're improving CO2 tolerance. I'll do another video later on where I explain the benefits of that from the perspective of improving your cardiovascular output and health. But for now, let's just dive into the session, and then I can talk a little bit about that session while I have my rest periods. So it's 15 seconds on, 15 seconds off for 8 rounds, and then I'm going to take a 3-minute rest and then perform another set of those 8 for 3 total sets. So we're working for 4 minutes of work within a set and then 3 minutes of rest. I can push that out to 4 if I want to keep that in more of a 1-to-1, but I'm at a point now with my aerobic conditioning that I'm quite happy to bring that rest period between sets back to 3 minutes. So I'm going to keep it there just so that I can keep the video relatively short, and I'll edit it so you don't have to watch the full 18 minutes of the session. And then we'll just touch base at the end or between rest periods where we can talk about some of the stuff that I'm going through. So let's get it. So that's 1 round done. Typically I'll spend this 3-minute period, also nose breathing. Again, I'll dive into that in a different video, but the purpose of this session is aerobic conditioning, and by nature, it should be easy. I like to categorize my energy system development with a traffic light system. So green light, yellow light, red light. Green light being a lighter intensity for a longer period so that we can explore that entire process of oxidative phosphorylation all the way down to the electron chain transport, where we offload a whole bunch of carbon. That carbon has to be bound to an oxygen molecule. So we're bringing in that oxygen and we're offloading that carbon, we're offloading that CO2. But the purpose of the nose breathing is it creates a breathing constraint where I'm actually restricting the amount of oxygen that I can bring in, but I'm not restricting the volume of oxygen that I'm having in my lungs at a time. So when I can still draw in a full breath, the fact that I'm slowing down my rate of breathing gives my nervous system and my respiratory system more time to detect oxygen molecules per breath, rather than just relying or being dependent on the next breath, which is what I see a lot of people that come into the clinic or come into train. They've got this atypical breathing pattern that's quite panicked, and as a result, their nervous system is chasing the next breath, always chasing the next breath, and this puts them into a system or a cycle of reactiveness rather than responsiveness. The nose breathing helps a couple of ways, but the main reason that I'm doing it is because I want to slow my breathing rate down to give my nervous system more time to detect oxygen molecules per breath. This allows me to use more oxygen molecule percentage per breath. So I'm increasing my gas exchange at my blood level, my cellular level. When we get to the end of that oxidative phosphorylation chain, that system, I'm offloading more carbon because I've got more oxygen available, more oxygen molecules available to bind that carbon to. Again, I'll do this in another video, but understand that there's a lot of layers here. There's a psychological element to it. There's a physiological element to it. We're just trying to create a constraint that challenges my capacity and my competency without making this too challenging that I can't do it. Let's hit it. So that's round 2 done. A different way of thinking about this level of conditioning, because it's green zone. We want it to be gentle, typically. Something that you can keep reproducing the same amount of effort and intensity across the duration of the session. Something one of my friends and colleagues, Greg Day, says is, we want to be producing the same amount of effort all the way through to the end with enough in the reserve so that we can give it a little nudge if we need to. So think about managing your resources and just not quitting. It shouldn't get to a point where you think you have to stop. That's aerobic training. Whereas when we start to get into the more anaerobic side of things, that's challenging your capacity. So here we're developing capacity. Anaerobic, we're trying to challenge it. We're wanting to work potentially towards more maximal efforts or higher intensities for shorter durations. The great thing with this is, technically, this is where the work starts, in the recovery phase, because aerobic is all about your ability to recover between efforts. I use nose breathing as a stimulus because that's where it challenges your ability to recover based on how well your body can utilize the oxygen coming in at a restricted rate. So essentially, I'm using a self-limiting piece of equipment, my nose, to restrict my oxygen flow just to improve my rate at carbon offset. So I'm improving my carbon dioxide tolerance in my rest period. So if you think about it, this is where the real aerobic training starts, in my rest periods. Something to think about. I got one more. I'm going to recover. So that's it, guys. That's the session done. It's roughly, depending on your intervals, your work to rest ratio between sets, it's typically anywhere between 18 to 21 minutes of work, and it's gentle. Sure, I'm a little out of breath, but that's because of the nose breathing in my active rest periods. But it's not something that, as you've seen, it's not something that is so challenging that I can't reproduce that same level of intensity. In this instance, intensity being relatively light. We just want to keep reproducing it so that I'm challenging my ability to recover via nose breathing. And that's what we should be aiming for with our aerobic training, is a gentle stimulus that we can apply over a sustained amount of time that's steadily, progressively overloaded, but it should never be something that we can't hold a conversation when we're in our rest periods. So something to think about. There's also another thing to note. I'm far less out of breath after that round than I was after my second and my first. I changed the height of my seat, which hasn't changed the stimulus, it's just changed the levers. So ergonomics on the implements that you use, whether that's a barbell or a dumbbell or an assault bike or a rower, the ergonomics play a part as well. I was working less hard to own the positions on the bike. Therefore, I was able to work less hard on creating consistent output at 350 watts on, 200 watts off, which made the entire sort of, 8 rounds of stimulus less taxing, but that doesn't make it less effective. It just means that I've probably found a more comfortable position for myself today, and I can work on that. And if I want to challenge that, I can just change the ergonomics on the bike to change the levers, and that may change the stimulus rather than increasing my wattage in my rest or in my active periods. Something to think about. Anyway, that's it for today. If you've got questions, I'd love to hear them. Feel free to shoot something in the comments below, or you can contact the page directly at principles.op@gmail.com. Hope to see you guys soon on the next video. Thanks so much.